Hello, all. I just ate one of the jalapeno poppers and it was very hot. Woo! I wanted to just quickly thank you all for coming today. My name is Shirlene, and I'm going to introduce you to the people who will be presenting to you today. Over here is Brett Payne. Brett is your Client Services Manager for Hood County. This is Kelly Odom. Kelly is a Senior Client Services Manager. This gentleman over here is Ken Pavovar. He is a Vice President for Program Management. He is the guru of all of the ARP funding, and he will be presenting ARP to you today, which I know is a big question for a lot of people. So we'll kind of get started. The idea is that we're going to try and go through and give you an idea of a whole lot of different grants that are available to you. And once we're done, inside the folder is the white folder. Inside of that is the, did we not give them a white folder?
Good green one. There's no such thing.
Okay, we're going to give you a white folder. and the white folder is a printout of the slideshow. So as we're going through the slideshow, please just write down your questions. At the end, we'll have you ask all the questions at the same time. So make sure you get your lunch, and I'm going to let Ken start this off for you. Thanks again for coming. And thank you to Commissioner Andrews for putting it together.
Afternoon, everybody. As Shirley said, my name is Ken Pavovar. I'm Senior Vice President of Program Management for GrantWorks, and have been spearheading the effort on ARP since, I guess, late January, early February, before the bill was passed in March. We've been following this bill incredibly closely, working with two lobby organizations and some of the advocacy groups, including NACO and NCL, trying to get a unified effort to help shape the bill, concentrating on the ease of reporting. Treasury has put together a nice portal for the reporting effort, and a reduction of red tape, which seems to plague a lot of the federal money. There was a strong effort in trying to push toward less red tape. So with that, I'm going to get started on the slideshow. What I'm going to do is go through an overview of ARP, some of the eligible uses of the funding, some of the requirements, and some of the requirements that have been cleared. And I'll take any questions at any time. You don't have to save them before through the end. Just let me know if you have a question. So first thing, there's a bunch of acronyms. Anytime you have a government program, you're going to have a ton of acronyms. I'm not going to spend much time on this because I think you guys know what a bunch of these are. We're familiar with ARP legislation. You'll see the letters SLFRF. What that refers to is the money that's given directly to municipalities, counties. So the federal government in this ARP bill, this funds tons of different things. The part that we're really going to talk about today is under subtitle M, and that's the part where the federal government has earmarked money, and you go on the Treasury website, give them details, and they send you the money. Or if you're an NEU, which in normal speak would be a non-entitlement, if you're an NEU, you would go to TDM to request the money, and then TDM has the money flow through you. All that falls under the SLFRF. All right, then we have our state, which looks like the same thing there, but slightly different initials. I'm not sure why we listed it twice, but it's the same thing. Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF, is just a shortened version. This you might be familiar with. It used to go by a different acronym. I think it was CFMA. It's kind of anytime you get money from the federal government, they assign you a number so that you have a tracking number. They've done away with that old system. This is the new one. NEU, I said before, TDM is where you're getting your money from if you're an NEU. And the GMS, if you haven't gone on, I think most of you should have by now. There's very few governments that haven't. TDM has a system called GMS that you have to register with in order to do business with them, or file reports or request funds. So it's a two-part thing for them. You register with GMS, and then you go in and request your funding. So this is what we're going to talk about. You do have the slides in that white folder that Brett and Kelly handed out. This is the main talking points we're going to hit today. You can kind of see how we're going to organize. It's all about what it is, how you get your money, how much are you getting, which everybody wants to know. I think a lot of you probably know that already. And what are some of the compliance? How can I use the money? So, high-level overview of ARP. What is it? Well, there's three big parts of legislation that are coming out with respect to COVID. And you can see the three here. You had the CARES Act that came out. The CARES Act is kind of your immediate response. It got money on the street, it handled emergencies, it handled vaccine clinics, it gave money to a wide variety of things, but it was really meant for the impact. We're dealing with COVID, here is money to get on the street and have an impact immediately. ARP is the next stage of the legislation. This is kind of the forward-thinking, longer-term recovery model after CARES. It did a lot of supplementary funding that was already in CARES. So it took a lot of those funds, for example, rental assistance funds, and it backed them up with additional cash so that they could be extended. And it also created a tremendous amount of new programs and gave money out through other organizations. As I said, the main one we'll talk about today has to do with the direct allocations under Subtitle M. American Jobs Act, you're probably aware that it's been going back and forth. The budget keeps fluctuating wildly in conversations in Washington. I think the most recent with the reconciliation package is over $3.5 trillion. So I would imagine it's going to be shot down again, and they'll go back and forth. There's got to be a balance between crazy spending and responsible help for people. So that's where that one's at right now. I wouldn't expect to see that out until November, December at the rate it's going. What we're going to talk about as part of ARP is the direct allocations. So when I'm talking about this, there's a few parts of the bill, and I'm not assuming everyone's read the bill. You probably read a lot of the publications that have come out about the bill, but the bill is very long. So there's three key sections here under Title IX, Subtitle M. That's the part where you get your direct allocation. There's three key parts under there, 202, 3, and 4. Section 202 is for the state, and it shows you how the money will go to states. Section 603 is the one we're all caring about. That's counties and cities. That's how you guys get the money. And then there's a final one, 604, which goes over capital projects. And in comparison to the other two, it's fairly minute at only $10 billion. It's not often you get to say only $10 billion. So the section 603, the one we care about, puts the money out in 4 different groups. You have money that goes out to counties, and they define counties just as county. Your population doesn't matter if you're a county. You get the money as a county. It comes directly from the United States Treasury. Entitlement cities, which is what we're used to calling them if you've ever done work with HUD, CPG work, there's entitlement cities, and then there's non-entitlement cities. So basic rule of that is 50,000. Now, of course, we all know there's some that fluctuate. Some entitlement cities that are 40,000 and some non-entitlement that are 55 and 60. But the 50,000 is a general breaking point. And these funds come directly from the Treasury. So if you're an entitlement city, you get your money from the Treasury. Don't think that applies to anyone in the room, except for the county. So non-entitlement cities. If your population is under 50,000, what the Treasury did is they gave the money out to state agencies in order for them to dole it out. And they gave it to TDM. You might ask, why did they do that? They did that because the burden that would have been put on the Treasury's system to try to manage every single entity going into the Treasury portal to try to request the funds would have been incredibly burdensome and probably would have collapsed the system. So what they did is they gave the rights to a state agency in each state, but they made very specific provisions that that state agency couldn't put additional requirements on the money. So TDM can't ask you for anything other than what the bill provides. So they can ask you for things like a copy of your budget. They can ask you who your officers are. They can ask you for bank account information. Anything related to getting you the money and validating that you're entitled to that amount, but they can't put requirements. TDM can't come back and put a reporting requirement on this or ask you about your planning purposes, because that would violate the Treasury stipulation. They're only a pass-through organization. And then, of course, the final one is the unincorporated areas. If you're not chartered, you don't get direct funds. The counties are responsible to take care of it. So, how do they get the amounts? Why did some places get a lot of money and some just get a little money? It's all based on population. So the Treasury did a few different calculations. When they did the calculation for counties, they factored in more than population. They factored in things like unemployment rate over time. And that's why you'll see some fluctuation in county funding. When it comes to towns, you can figure out the towns to the dollar. I think it came out to $257 per capita. So whatever your estimated population was, as of the special POP section in census's population data, if you multiply that number by 257, you get your allocation. All right. So you can see up here, it's all based on 2019. Money going to counties, I got asked this a lot. Because they see the money going to the cities, they see money in the county and money in the state, and they're wondering, are there any flow downs? And the answer is no. Each bucket of money is a discrete bucket of money. The county gets their money independently of cities and the state. So whatever you're getting is for city use only. I'm sorry, whatever you're getting as a county is for the county, whatever you get for the city is the city. Now, you do have the right to decline the money. If you're a city and you decline the money, what you can do is fill out a form, and it will feed the money back to the state. And you might say, why in the world would I ever want to do that? If I got money, I want to spend it at home. And I agree. But there are certain cities in Texas that don't have significant operating budgets. So if you're one of those, and it falls into something I'll talk about in a minute called the 75% rule, where you can't keep the money because you're only allowed to get money that equals up to 75% of your budget. So let's say you were getting $1 million, but your annual budget's only $100,000. We're only gonna let you keep 75,000 of that $1 million you were getting. That's a pretty extreme example. There's not really many cities that fall into that. But the idea is you might want to kick your money up to the state and try to make a deal and say, hey state, I'm gonna kick this up to you, but I kind of want a few activities done on our behalf. Okay, so that's the 75% rule. Whatever your operating budget is, your total operating budget, the ARP funds can't go over 75% of that. And TDM will let you know that when you apply for the funds. Right now, I think there's 53 cities that have applied that fell into that bucket. They're not going to get their full allocation. And that is, if you go to TDM's website, TDM/CLFRF, it's right on that page. You can look it up. So how do you get your money? I would imagine this slide probably doesn't pertain to most of you. You probably already have your money. But in case you don't, just know it's in two tranches. You get half up front and half after a year, right? If you're an entitlement or you're a county, you go on to Treasury website. You have to do a fund process with ID.me. Is anybody here from Hood County? Like works that actually is from the county level? Okay. So you guys had to go through and you had to do the ID.me process with the United States Treasury. Now, the confusing part of that is a lot of people are very put off by that process because they start asking you a lot of personal information. And you're thinking, why do I have to put this in? It's not for me, it's for the county. The whole point of ID.me is simply to validate someone's identity so that there's no fraud. And a lot of people were very put off by it and didn't want to continue the process because it seemed invasive. Especially if you had inconsistent documents, like one document had your middle name, the other one didn't. then they'd ask you for more data. One judge was asked for his marriage certificate. You know, he didn't want to give them that. There's just too much information. But that's the idea of IDing. It proves who they're dealing with. In case there's ever a problem, they know, okay, I validated it. That was the judge I was talking to, then we moved the money. Okay, so funds all get moved electronically. After you get through the IDV process, you have to go to the Treasury portal using your new ID, and then give it the banking information, and they send the money electronically. From what we've seen, that money has fluid in days. It's pretty quick. One thing to keep in mind, especially for the county, Treasury uses a two-part identification system. In other words, when you go into your login with your username and your password, and you think you're going to file a report, at the end of the report, when you hit send, it's going to send an authentication code to whoever you listed in the portal as the authorized person to file a report. And I bring that up because a lot of times people want to put a judge's name on that line, but the judge isn't really the one filling out the report. So someone in the office is filling out a report, and then all of a sudden the judge gets a text message with 8 digits on it and goes, "What's this?" Puts it in his pocket, and the person filing the report doesn't know how to finish because they don't have the code. So there's going to need to be a little collaboration if you have two different people filing a report other than the person who was listed on the Treasury site. Make sure that when you're ready to send a report, that person knows they're either going to get a text message or an email with an authentication code. What if you're a non-entitlement, which is most of the room here? If you're a non-entitlement, you're getting it from TDM. Hopefully you're all registered in GMS. And I think last time I checked, I didn't find anybody from Hood County that wasn't.
Yeah, there's one.
There is one. Who is it?
Stockton Bend.
Oh, Stockton Bend is not registered. Okay.
Anybody from Stockton Bend?
Okay. So you're going to fill out a some form. So you've already done this, so I'm going to skip through most of this. But this is the general website, the CLFRF at TDM. If you ever need information, that's a good spot to go for how you deal with TDM. So anybody that has not registered yet, TDM has announced, and I think this should be September 17th, if you don't put your registration in by the September 17th, you risk losing the funds. And that is an extension of the actual legislation, which says 60 days. So once the funds are made available to you, you have a 60-day window to request them. TDM's been a little bit more generous. 60 days actually would have been September 2nd. So it looks like they're going about 2 weeks extra. Whether or not they'll actually deny you the funds, I don't know, but they do have the right to. So here's some data for folks that might be in the room. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, Stockton Bend didn't register. So Hood County, you're getting $11.9 million, which means that up front, you're getting about $5.95 million to your bank account. A year later, you get the second half. These are the allocations for the cities that are within Hood County. You'll notice what I was talking about before happened with D. Cordova. You had a TDM allocation of $753,000. The 75% rule hit because your annual operating budget was only around $98,000 or so. So they're only allowing you to get $72,000 of that. And then of course Stockton Bend, we won't know what theirs is until they register. But if they have a low operating budget under say 115,000 or so, they won't get to keep the full 88. It'll be prorated to 75% of the budget. Any questions on the allocations before I move forward? Yeah.
Is that based on current budget or the last budget? What budget?
It's self-reported. So when you went into TDM, you had to report what your operating budget was. And they didn't give you a ton of guidelines on how to do it. They just asked you, what's your bottom dollar? How much money moves through the city's accounts? Your operating budget. If you have a police force, obviously that would count. But whatever money comes through is your operating budget. And when you report it, they look at the lesser of 75% of that number for your TDM allocation, and that's what you get.
But that's past budget.
Yeah, last year. It's the last full year.
Okay.
Yep. So you got this money, what can you do with it? I'm gonna go over the very generalized one, and then we'll get a little deeper on each one. So there's 4 key provisions of the bill. And if you've looked over the bill, these are widely reported on. The first one is response to the public health emergency. This is probably the most broad of all of the topics. It basically says that if someone was impacted by COVID, you can help them. And they divide it up a little better than that generality. You can give money out to individuals, you can give money out to businesses, specific businesses, or you can give money out to impacted industries, like tourism, for example. And in order to do that, you'd have to create a program. You can't just decide who gets what. You'd have to do policy and procedures, write program rules, do an application cycle, evaluate them for their eligibility, and then prioritize them and get the money out the door. The key in that process that the government's going to be looking for is equity and distribution, so that someone's friend doesn't get 100,000 where someone who had 3 times the impact only gets 20,000. There's got to be an equitable distribution for your program. So that's all under that first bullet, assistance to households, small business, nonprofit. There's a lot of other things you can do under that that are kind of behind the scenes, and that could be public building work. For example, let's say you have a town hall or city hall and you have working arrangements there and people are in close proximity to each other. And you want to make some improvements that allow the spacing to be better. They could be financed under this provision. Let's say that you have an old ventilation system and you want to improve the ventilation system and possibly put in better filters or UV filtration light or something like that. Falls under this provision. You have a jail system that because you can't get juries, courts are backed up and your jails are more crowded and people are too close together. You can do improvements that allow better spacing and ventilation and sanitation in the jail system. Anything that helps mitigate COVID or a future pandemic kind of gets lumped in under bullet number 1. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and it really puts the onus on you guys to say, here's a project I really want to do. How can I write it and get it justified under this act? There's lots of ways. The spirit of the bill essentially is that they want to prevent future problems. And if there's something that you're going to do that will help that, you get it financed. The second one is the provision of premium pay. This is a tricky one. As if anybody's familiar with the Texas Constitution, there's Article 3, Section 53, kind of talks about not being able to pay retroactive pay. Once a government has agreed to pay someone, the payment has been made, you can't go back later and supplement their pay. It's written right into the Texas Constitution. So that seems to fly in the face of the federal government's provision of premium pay. Now, we've reached out for legal opinions to see if, because this is coming from a higher level of government, it would, be, I guess, higher order of precedence over the Texas Constitution. And that's a tricky ground for attorneys that they don't necessarily want to go to because Texas likes having home rule. The safe way to institute this provision is using it in a forward-thinking manner. If you have people that were put in harm's way for the past year and you want to do premium pay, instead of structuring it retroactively, do it as a continued service bonus. So you can do this going forward. Now there's some thresholds I'll go over with you in a minute, but I would say that the way to handle this and not ever be in violation of the Texas Constitution is to make sure it's forward-looking, not retroactive. So number 3, provision of government services. This one's changed over time when it got published. When it first came out, it basically said, we're giving you a bunch of money. If you guys have canceled government services because you've had budget problems, restore those services and pay for them with this money until you get your budget resolved. That definition has expanded. And in the interim final rule, they expanded the definition of what lost revenue is and gave us a calculator. And actually the GFOA published it. It's on the Treasury site there. And it allows you to calculate your lost revenue. It basically makes some broad level assumptions that say, if you had revenue in 2019 and you don't have them today, you can attribute them to COVID. So it's a very broad way to calculate money. Now, we'll get into the more detail on that in a minute, but that doesn't mean you can just keep the money, you still have to spend it. But there's more flexibility with the spending. And the last one, the one that's probably the most interesting, in my opinion, is the infrastructure part. When you talk about being able to make investments in water, sewer, and broadband, now a lot of communities will always ask, why not roads and bridges? Well, two reasons. One, there's an upcoming infrastructure bill in the American Jobs Act that's supposed to handle a lot of that. And number two, they limited infrastructure to things that were identified as needs in a pandemic. If you're gonna make people shelter at home, they need to be able to get clean water, they need their wastewater removed, and they need access to work and go to school from home. So these were the logical components to put into the bill. So that's why it's water, sewer, and broadband. So there's more details on this as well. Am I too far away from
No,
that?
you're fine.
So what are our allowable uses of the fund? This first one we talked about before, and I hit a bunch of the high points of it. But the key here is tie back to COVID. If you think about anything that you want to do for the public health emergency, it's kind of logical to think, well, I need to tie it to an actual COVID event. So that's what you're going to be looking to do when you write up a justification, or if you write a business case for a particular project. You're going to want some kind of tie back that shows, I'm doing this because of this, or I'm doing this to mitigate in the future this event. And as long as you can do those things, you have a good foundation for your project. The other side of this that's going to come down the line on the reporting side is the government came up with 66 different expenditure categories, and your funding has to fit in one of them. And they did break them up by type of work. So there is a public health response category, EC1, and then a whole bunch of bullets under it where you'd have to fit the funding in for your project. Okay, so some examples here. You can do employee payrolls with this. If you hired anybody and their payroll, you hired them for the point of dealing with COVID, you can pay them out of this fund, completely, benefits and all. We have one county that hired people to do cleanings for the courtroom, the jails, and public buildings. And they brought in kind of like temps, but who knows how long they'll have them. They're giving them $14 an hour. Every time they get paid, it comes out of this fund. Because the purpose of their job is to manage some COVID level response. If you want to do anything with vaccination centers or testing centers, this is where it would all come from. Okay, and then all of these, if you haven't seen this, Treasury put out these rules. Then Treasury maintains a frequently asked questions document. I think the last update was July 19th or so. They haven't updated it since. And every time they put out new questions, that document just grows bigger and bigger. It's a great resource. A lot of the questions that you might have on spending might be answered in that document. The other thing is the interim final rule. If you're not familiar with that process, when a federal program comes out, they write the basic legislation or the bill gets passed. Anytime that they do supplements or anytime that they do rules or clarifications, they get published in the Federal Register. And that's what the interim final rule is. And after they've evaluated the interim final rule and all the questions, they'll come out with a final rule. And that'll kind of be law of the land for the duration of the program. That is yet to be published. We kind of expected that to happen already. So here's your premium pay provision. And here's some of the details I was talking about before. The premium pay clause was really put in there for you to deal with the government workers or non-government contract workers that aren't making a ton of money. It wasn't really set up and there aren't a ton of people in government making a ton of money, but the idea is it's made for your lower wage earners. So when you look at this, you can increase their pay by up to $13 an hour, total of $25,000 for the year. And once they caveat it right here, and it's pretty generous, it basically says if you look around at that person's job in other areas, if they're making 150% of the average, you can't pay them extra. Because they're already making better than what we could call prevailing wage in the area would be. Okay, and this is the key here is third parties are eligible. So if you have contract labor, you can give it to them if you want. And so that would be, you could do this with things like daycares. If you wanted to help out daycares, you could do food workers, anything that was critical to keeping operations going. And again, FAQ and the final interim will have all the details. Here's your government services that we brought up before. The idea of the lost revenue I didn't mention before, you do a base year calculation from 2019 to 2020. And everybody should be able to do that because your budget should be final, your expenditures are final for 20. So you can get your first lost revenue calculation done. You can do this every year. So 2021, 22, 23. And you can get 4 years worth of lost revenue if you have lost revenue. And you might say, well, what's the value of doing that? The value of doing the lost revenue is this. Let's say that in 2019 you had a base revenue of $1 million. And when you do your base revenue calculation, certain things can't be included. Like if you're collecting money for water, sewer, that stuff can't be included. But you get your sum of, you aggregate all of your revenue, and it's $1 million. And then in 2020, it's $750,000. You can pretty much say, with very few exceptions, I lost $250,000. Well, before I said that doesn't mean you can reclaim it. What it means is that you can take it aside and you can use it on more liberal interpretation of activities than is provided in the bill. Because think of it this way, you're clearing money through one of the 4 avenues, either public health, premium pay, lost revenue, or infrastructure. Once you've called it lost revenue, the government's interested in how you spend it, not that you spent it on one of the other 3 eligible categories, because you've already cleared it as an eligible category. So let's say you do have a roads project, or a bridge project, or a drainage project. You could use it on those items. But you do have to, same rules apply with the allocation. Funds have to be allocated by 2024 and spent by 26. Okay, our last category is the infrastructure one. And I'm going to tell you a few reasons why I like this category so much. I think it's probably a category most people are most comfortable with. I mean, in government work, you do a lot of infrastructure work. You're always trying to maintain some level of infrastructure that goes on in your localities. And there's always red tape. And especially if you're applying for federal funding to do anything, you know it's slow and there's tons of red tape. Treasury's gotten rid of a lot of the red tape. So what's some of the red tape they've gotten rid of? Well, normally when you get money from FEMA or HUD, you have a full environmental you have to do that goes through NEPA. And it can be time consuming. You don't have NEPA. The Treasury has said no NEPA. You'll still have to meet whatever other rules you have. I mean, if you're going near a railroad, you're hitting near a waterway, there are other agencies that you're gonna have to interact with to clear your project, but you don't have to do the federal process, which will save a ton of time. All right. For the most part, you don't have prevailing wage laws or Davis-Bacon that you have to deal with. So the red tape is just removed on some of these items. And that'll allow you to get your projects going faster. You still need an engineer, because in Texas, you need an engineer as soon as that project goes over 20 grand. So that you're not gonna find much you're doing for under 20 grand, you're gonna need some engineers. So the water and sewer, here's another thing that I like about the water and sewer. Treasury was smart enough to know that they are not a qualified organization to write a bunch of rules on how to run an infrastructure project. So they looked around to other organizations that do it. And they found through the EPA, the state revolving funds. If you've got any experience with them, there's 2, the clean water and the drinking water. So Treasury looked over those documents and said, we're gonna tie our eligibility to them. If the project's eligible through clean water or the drinking water revolving funds, it's eligible for this. And that was a really smart move because it made it so that you didn't have to learn a whole bunch of new things to run your projects. The tricky part of that is if you do a cursory review of state revolving funds, you find lots of things are eligible, including drainage programs, which everybody was asking about early on. Can I do drainage? Why is water and sewer include stormwater? Well, if you go into the clean water state revolving fund, it does, but not as a general expenditure. You can't do one of those for the sake of doing drainage. If you read into the details, there has to be a water quality benefit. So what does that mean? It means that I can't just increase the size of my culvert so I can dump more water into a waterway. Can't do it. What I need to do is show why is the quality of the water that's going in the waterway somehow now better than it was if I didn't do this project. So if you did a drainage basin and that water went into an intermediate basin where solids could settle out, or oil was filtered off, or whatever, some water quality benefit before it made its way into that stream, river, canal, whatever it is, you fit the bill now. So there's some careful detail that has to be done when you design your drainage program in order to make it fit the revolving fund rules. If you do that, you can do drainage projects. All right, broadband is another one. There's been a lot of activity in Texas. Yeah.
I've done some pretty extensive research on this, and I haven't been able to connect the dots. I've talked to the folks at with the state of Texas, and you have to put in for revolving funds in Texas for a wastewater plant, for instance.
Right.
By the 1st of March, in order to be considered for their grants next year. So you're out of the window right now. But the question is, I haven't been able to connect the dots on how we can take this money now and start, for instance, a potential wastewater treatment plant without waiting till March 1st to apply for it through the revolving fund.
Okay. Well, the trick there is you're talking about now using potentially two sources of funding to get your project finished.
Correct.
And anytime you commingle funds, you're always going to run into some fun stuff. But if you're looking to start a project, my thought would be phase it, because this money has to be allocated by 24, spent by 26. If you run into any issues with this treatment plant and getting funding from the revolving fund to do it, and you miss timelines, you run into problems with this batch of funding. So if there's any way to phase that into discrete units or smaller projects, that would be my recommendation, to make sure that you can show how this funding was spent and close it out. And then you need less from the actual state revolving fund.
So what do you mean when you say it needs to be allocated by 2024?
It basically means that, let's say you have program design coming up, right? A lot of you probably know what project you want to do, but you don't have engineering on them yet. Well, you can't really allocate your funds until you have a budget. You need to have a concrete budget in front of you. You need to have a contractor that comes in and says, yep, the engineer said it was a $3 million project. Contractor comes in and bids and says, I'll do it for the $3 million. Now you can go back and you can allocate those funds effectively because you have someone who did that reasonable cost determination, and then you have a contractor say, yeah, I'll do it. Now you're truly budgeted.
Okay.
And that's the allocation phase. And you're going to show that allocation on one of your reports to Treasury. You have obligated funds. Now you might go over budget, you might save a little money, but you have it obligated, and that obligation has to be done by 24 or they take the money back. And then as long as you have it obligated, you have an extra 2 years to actually expend it. And we all know these sound like a long time, but in an infrastructure environment, that's not always a long time. Things take way longer than you'd expect when you start running these projects. So that's the key here. So a lot of this, while I always recommend commingling funds, no, I think it gets sticky, especially if there's a funding source that's slightly competitive or there's a limited amount and your project doesn't get funded and you were counting on that to finish to show the Treasury that you finished using these funds, it gets sticky. I would recommend avoiding it if possible. So jumping into the broadband side of this, on the broadband, there's a lot of efforts that have happened for mapping, broadband mapping. You've probably heard of these things, but different organizations put out what they think the broadband access is in specific regions. Well, Treasury has defined broadband as the ability to download at 25 megabit per second and upload at 3. And they further said, if you can do that, you don't qualify for broadband spending. Now that doesn't mean, especially for a county, you might have that in parts of your county and not other parts of your county. So the parts where you don't have it, you're eligible to do broadband. I want to make sure, a lot of people get confused on broadband. Broadband doesn't include like your emergency management radio center, things like that. This is for people's use in their homes. This is widespread broadband, people's access to the internet. And the trick here, if you do qualify for broadband, and you're going to show that by finding some existing study, and the existing study will showcase these areas don't fit that definition. So you go, okay, I'm going to put in a broadband program. You can't just meet that definition anymore. You have to build it better. And the immediate ability of that has to be 100 megabit per second download and 25 upload with the scalability to 100. Fiber optic fits that bill easily. So if you're going to do a fiber optic system, you can build a fiber optic system. You just have to work with whoever the provider is to ensure that based on whatever population you're serving, it has the capacity to do 100 download and 100 upload. And as long as you're building to that capacity, you're eligible to use the money on broadband. The cool part of this, there's nothing in here that shows you have to tie anything back to COVID. So you're not doing a broadband thing and showing a tie to COVID, you're just showing a tie to the lack of the resource. We don't have broadband, the bill allows us, so we're doing broadband. Same thing with your water sewer. We need water improvements, we're going to do water improvements. Because the three types of infrastructure are inherently tied to pandemic response. Okay, so some examples, you can do pipe burst. Lead and copper rule has been a hot topic out of Washington, and I think Texas is actually one of the earliest states to dive in and start adopting that legislation and pushing the agenda. So if you did have old lead lines or you have copper problems in certain areas, this is an opportunity to improve the water lines. There's so many opportunities with these funds. Okay, so, yeah.
Backing up a second to premium pay, I have a question about that. It states here that these funds may be provided retroactively.
Yes, it does. And from the Treasury's perspective, yes.
How retroactive?
To January January you can go to. From
2021?
Yeah. You can
Or
go
20?
from 20, from the start of the pandemic. But I'm advising against that because of the danger of violating Texas Constitution with the retro pay provision.
So you're recommending that that's,
Yeah, I'm just,
to ignore that sentence?
well, I would ignore it from the Treasury. The Treasury might not come back and claw the money back because according to them, you spent it correctly, but you could run into trouble with the state. Now, it would be a wildly unpopular thing for the state to try to come back and penalize you for that. So I don't necessarily know that they would do it, but why gamble when you can, it's actually a better policy for you to keep the employees would be a continued service bonus, because then they gotta stay with you in order to get, if let's say you extend it for 4 or 6 months at an increased paycheck every pay period, it's a better policy.
Thank you.
So this is some of the compliance items. So procurement, the bill specifically calls out that you have to do 2 CFR 200 compliant procurement, which means if you procured a consultant to help you come in and manage the process, if you're hiring a contractor, you're hiring an engineer, you must follow 2 CFR 200. And I'm sure being in government, you're familiar with 2 CFR 200. So environmental compliance. We know we don't have NEPA, but any state or local laws still apply. So you still have to go through the proper agencies like TxDOT, TECQ, you're doing wastewater treatment. You still have to go through the appropriate agencies with your project. What I'm trying to say by that is the Treasury didn't alleviate any state requirements. It just prevented the state from making new requirements. And then, of course, you have URA. URA could be triggered if you're doing any kind of acquisition activity. And likely, depending on the size of the budget, you're probably not going to do much in the way of URA or allocation, acquisition or buyouts. So on the other side, the accounting and documentation. So I got this money, I found a few ways to spend it, I prioritized prioritized all of my items. I decided on 4 projects I want to run with this money. And I followed all of my rules on 2 CFR 200 environmental, and most likely URA is not going to be applicable if you don't have buyer acquisition. But what do I do now? How do I keep tabs on the money? Do you have to go out and set up a whole bunch of separate accounts? No. You just have to have internal accounting that specifically talks about the ARP money and shows it either a declining balance, depending on how you guys do your work, whether you're accrual or cash or how you do your accounting. Just follow your own internal processes. If you look at the Treasury portal, they're more aligned with the cash accounting style, so it might be easier if you do that method of accounting. But the funds have to be used on things that happened after March 3rd, 2021, with the exception of that retroactive pay provision. You want to keep reports on how you're spending it. This is the critical part. Because if you're an NEU, you're only going to report to Treasury once a year. The importance of really good records is in a year when you go to report, you're probably not going to remember all the details of the project. And that's really the basis of keeping the good records. You're going to want to divide up the monies that you spent into what they call expenditure categories, so you can kind of budget different categories and show the Treasury how every dime was spent. So here are just some basic best practices. You're going to want a standards of conduct document, policy and procedure for each project that you're doing. Some of these documents might not be exhaustively long, but you want them to show how we're going to manage things, how we're going to manage the money, how we're going to manage the project team, what we're checking, what's our frequency of going out and inspecting the lines we're putting in. All of these things should be documented. How we're doing our compliance monitoring, and then of course our maintenance and retention. So just some standard things you want to make sure, whether you hire a consultant or not, these are just best practices to where if you're one of the files OIG decides to pull an audit, you've got a real clear record trail. And it makes it easy. Coming out, okay. Once, good documentation usually ends those things pretty quickly. Okay. So what are the reporting requirements? Well, I hope you all met the first one. If you're an NEU, you didn't have any. This went off the bottom a little bit. That's all right. And we'll deal with it. The interim report. There's 3 levels of reports. Treasury said we want an interim report to tell us how you spent money quickly after you got it, if you spent any. The big governments had to do this report. If you're an NEU, no requirement. The second report that everyone will have to do is the project and expenditure reports. And the project and expenditures reports is basically your balance sheet. How did I spend the money? What categories did it go into? And it's Treasury put out a pretty thorough book on the reporting requirements. And it's definitely worth reading because although they say reporting's easy in this, it's specific. And you're going to want to know all the details long before you need to report, or you won't have the right information when you do go to report. I wouldn't say that this is highly burdensome, but you need a staff member that thoroughly understands this, or a consultant who's going to do it for you. So you have quarterly reports or annual reports. If you're an NEU, you're only filing once a year.
So you do realize we're not an NEU.
You're county.
That's correct.
Right. But there's a few NEUs in here, right? Also, I thought we had other towns in here too.
Not I'm aware of. Everybody in here is all county.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we had a mixed group.
Oh, La Pena. Oh, sorry.
Almost.
He's hiding on the other side of me.
So for the counties are going to report quarterly. So your first one's due at the end of October.
Correct.
So for everything you've done up through the end of September, you need to report. And this is different from the interim report. The interim report is fairly simple. You're running through and you're basically, for most of you, or for the county, there's probably a whole bunch of zeros really. And then you just kind of file it. The next one's going to be more difficult. You have your 66 expenditure categories you got to do, and there's a lot of detail they're going to ask you about obligated funds. So it's worth looking through that guidance. And then the other one doesn't apply to anyone. Only governments bigger than 250,000 people have to do the recovery plan performance report. Obviously, they gave that one to the governments that have tons of staff and can do all of that planning. But the county will have to report quarterly. So they're gonna look for obligations on a quarterly basis. What are you earmarking this money for on a project basis? And then how are you expending it going forward? Alright, so one of the things that confused people, especially the NEUs, was the fact that you're getting your money from TDM. They didn't think they needed to report to Treasury, and that's not true. Everyone reports to Treasury directly. TDM's just a pass-through for the money. So one of the things we're recommending to all the people that we're helping is that they go and register with Treasury, the IDV system, which we know can be a little bit of a challenge initially. They should be doing that now. And the reason is that they get their portal access stuff long before they have to report. Everyone has to go in before October 31st and enter their expenditure reports. Whether you're county, an NEU, big metro city, doesn't matter. Everyone has to do it. So if you guys deal with any of your constituent cities within the county, it'd be good to give them a heads up that you need to register with Treasury so that they can report. All right, so okay, Arkin's put out a bunch of, I don't know if every people in here are members of Arkin or not. I've looked over a lot of their stuff, it's helpful. They put out procurement guidance and other support documents that kind of help you with procurement. Whether it's doing your RFQs for engineers or RFPs for hiring consultants. So they seem to be a pretty helpful organization and they're cheap. And then inside your package, you'll see there's some links to source information. Of course, primary sources are always the best. Treasury has a fantastic page now it's developed over the past few months. The Treasury page is phenomenal, and TDM actually has really good resources. They've developed that page out really well. Anybody have any questions on anything we covered, or have any specific questions about art? No? So there's some other interesting stuff. Different groups, everybody that we've been working with has had at least one interesting question that makes you go back to the legislation and try to come up with a way to make it fit. So you guys are probably familiar with the FAST grants where you get your fire and ambulance and all that. There's ways to use ARP money to improve police cars, ambulances, first response vehicles as well. As long as you're tying it to the ability to respond to the pandemic. If you have, if your current vehicles to respond are inadequate, and people would lack the ability to see a first responder in a short amount of time, and buying a vehicle will help get that done, you can justify it through ARP. What I'm saying is, keep your minds open to the needs, because there's usually a way to fit the ARP money. It was meant to be flexible. They designed this intentionally flexible. They just want the cities to, and the counties to find ways to make it all work. They don't want to recoup this money. They gave it all out, they want it spent, they just want it done and documented well. The scary thing, I think, for a lot of the cities and counties is, this isn't like other grants. Most grants, you put together a really well thought out application, you get an engineer, you detail your whole project out, and then you submit it, and you hope to get funded. And if you get funded, it's easy, because everybody's on the same page. This was a really well documented thing, we told you we were gonna do it, now we just execute and spend your money. This is the opposite. It's scarier because the government went, here's a boatload of money, spend it. We don't want it back, really. God, that's a little scarier. So the fact of the matter is, when you look at the legislation, they don't want it back. It's not a trick. They're not coming to claw it all back. It's really meant to stimulate the economy and prepare you better to deal with emergencies in the future. So it's just a matter of documenting it really well, making sure all of your reports are filed on time, that you've allocated the money according to their layout. But it's a huge opportunity. Yeah.
So I'm with the local mental health authority.
Are you saying I need to be evaluated?
I'm not saying that out loud. That would be hypnotic. Could you talk just for a second about how these funds could be used? That's where my question came from on the retroactive pay. We run outpatient mental health clinics. We never closed during the pandemic for the past year and a half. Residential programs, emergency crisis intervention programs, those types of things. So in reading through some of the rules, it can be applied to behavioral health
Yeah.
services.
And everything you just said can be funded, whether it's from that second provision where you're gonna do a premium pay part and give them an increased rate. I would just say going forward. The other side of it is you can do expanded services under that, under response to the public health emergency. Perhaps on like suicide crisis lines, or if you do any kind of counseling, you're seeing an increased need because of COVID. Well, you can add to your staff and cover them under this bill. There's a ton of flexibility there because you're responding to the crisis. So yeah, it's not where I could say, hey, this program's eligible, this program's eligible. It really comes down to program design. When you talk about paying those staff members, you would have to quantify the impact of COVID in order to pay your staff members. So you could show, here's how much the need increased, so we're paying that amount. The other side of it is just hiring additional folks, paying their salaries completely out of COVID. The challenge there, of course, is now you've built a bigger staff, and how do you maintain them after this funding's gone? So,
Right, I was about to mention that. The
Yeah.
sustainability of that's a little scary,
yeah,
especially if you're paying existing staff an enhanced wage or a premium pay. Even if you do it quarterly or annually, instead of in their each paycheck, you build that expectation. They look at it as their pay.
sure, yeah,
So when all that money comes to a stop,
right.
there you have it.
Yep.
So
It's another can of worms that can be
Yeah.
opened.
yeah, kind of a can of worms.
Yep. And then there's always the can of worms too, that when you give bonus pay or premium pay out to government and it occupies a sizable portion of the overall allocation, the public could come screaming, oh, it's the government handing out money to the government. So
Yeah.
there's perception issues there too. So all of it has to be balanced. Some of the larger cities have done a lot of community interaction to see best usage of the funds. And that tends to help things go over a little bit better, especially if you're gonna take a percentage of it for something like premium pay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, turn it back to Shirley.
So, we're gonna talk real quick, about hazard mitigation. I am not Wendy. Wendy is the head of the hazard mitigation department for GrantWorks. She's on vacation, so I'm filling in for her. The Hood County current hazard mitigation plan expires on June 4th, 2026. Those participants in the plan are the county, the city of Crescent, Granbury, Toller, and is it Lipen or how do you pronounce it? Lipan? Okay. Sorry, I apologize. So those are the people who are participants in this plan. This plan is becoming increasingly important because all of these hazard mitigation grants that are becoming available, you have to be part of the plan, and whatever you want to be able to do has to be in that plan. So if the city of Crescent is interested in getting, a road, a drainage done on a certain road, that has to be listed in the hazard mitigation plan for them to be able to apply for it. Didn't used to be that way, it is now. So, all of those things that you got together on as a county or as a city and said we want to do this, we want to do that, those are the things that you can apply for now in all of these programs that we're going to talk about. There are 6 programs right now. There's the winter storm, Uri. That deadline is November the 5th. That's being managed through TDEM, and there's 28 million estimate. It's a statewide competition, and it's 75% and 25% match. So if you want $100,000, then 75% of it can get through the grant, 25% will be matched. So you will have $25,000. Management costs can be up to 5%. That's 100% paid for in the grant. So you would get $105,000. The next one is Hurricane Laura. You all are not part of Hurricane Laura. The flood program of 2021 grant, those are due on November 30th. I'm pretty sure you are not part of that. It's $160 million, and it's a nationwide competition. The building resilient infrastructure for 2021, those deadlines are December 3rd. Again, it's through TDEM, it's $1 billion, and it is a nationwide competition. DR 4585 you may have heard about. That is the $666 million mitigation funds that are coming in to the state. The dates that they're going to be due, that the applications are going to be due, that has not been announced. But it's going to be a 75-25 again. And then I'm going to forget, LHMPP, Local Hazard Mitigation Plan Program. That money has been exhausted, so we're not going to discuss that right now. So the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, this is Winter Storm Uri. You can see where Hood County is both individual assistance and public assistance. So any damage that you had, you should have filled out and reported that. Now is the time for you to try and get that money recouped, or to get whatever damages were, to get those taken care of. Again, I think those applications are due in November, so not a lot of time. Hurricane Laura, you were not part of. COVID, the whole state is part of this. This is the $666 million, million. How much? 666 billion? Million. It's an M that's coming into the state. Sorry. And so everybody in the state is named in this. So now is the time to start figuring out what, if you want to apply for some of these funds, and we'll talk about what you can apply for. But Hood County is obviously, and all of the cities within the county, you can apply for. So flood mitigation assistance, that's going to be elevation, acquisition, relocation, and reconstruction. There's $160 million total available, allocated up to $10 million for project scoping. Community flood mitigation projects is $70 million, and at least $80 million for technical flood hazard mitigation planning and individual flood mitigation proposals. So, just to give you an idea of the timeline, this is through the Texas Water Development Board, and there was a notice of funding that came out on August 9th. If you were interested in this, you have to put in your request for the funds by September the 3rd. The deadline, they will tell you whether they're going to accept it, and then you have until November the 30th to submit. And December 1st through 17th, Texas Water Development Board is going to send a request for information. January 7th, and anyway, January 25th, they'll submit eligible sub-applications to FEMA. Texas Water Development Board will do that. The Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, BRIC. The whole idea of this is to strengthen resilience by incentivizing investments that reduce the risk and increase pre-disaster mitigation. So what they're trying to say is if you had a problem with something before, let's fix it so it doesn't happen again. That's what BRIC is about. A lot of things you can do with the money. One of the things that's important for you to remember is both the FMA and the BRIC programs are now tied into low to moderate income. They did not used to be that. That's the Justice 40 initiative. This is the first time for that. I'm just trying to go through this real quick for you because I don't want to take up a whole lot of your time. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the types of projects that you can do for both hazard mitigation, BRIC, and FMA. So this lists all the different types of programs that are going to be authorized. So let's go down to generators. And so under hazard mitigation grant, that's a yes, BRIC is a yes, FMA flood mitigation is a no. See that? So this, just go down, take a look at all the different types of eligible projects, and then this will tell you whether they are or they not, that you can apply for it. They're covered under those programs. So, whoops, let me go back. I don't know how to do that. I was right. Okay. All right. Yeah, let's look at that one. All right. I'm sorry, I went through that real quick. The hazard mitigation is becoming more and more one of those programs that more and more people are getting involved in. And all of you have needs, I know, and so it's a matter of figuring out if they're going to be authorized under this or one of these programs. So it is competitive. All of them are competitive, and so if you're interested in those, you can always give us a call, and we'll try and guide you through what it is you want to do. We'll try and figure out for you if it's something that's going to work or not work. Does anybody have any questions about this? Great. I'm going to turn it over to Brett.
I just want to reiterate real quickly before we get into the next step. These green binders that we have in front of you has all the information for these following grants and other programs that we're going through. So we're going to kind of give you all a brief overview of going through the PowerPoint presentation. I don't want to take up too much of y'all's time, but if y'all do have any further questions, all this information is referenced in those binders, and then my contact info is in the back, or in the front as well. A little business card in the front. I'm the client service manager for y'all's region. I have a field office located in Frisco, so I'm not that far away. If y'all have any grant questions or needs, y'all can reference me as well. So we we have a bunch of acronyms here, some that we've gone over already, some that y'all may be familiar with, and some that you may not be familiar with. We have acronym breakdowns in those binders as well for y'all to kind of go through. If there's something that y'all see that you're not really sure what it stands for, we have that provided for you as well. Just to kind of give y'all a brief overview of GrantWorks. Some of you may be familiar with us, some of you may not. We've been doing grant management for about 42 years now. We have 11 fully staffed departments with individuals like Ken that are subject matter experts in their different programs in reference to whatever funding that you as a county or cities that are within the limits of y'all's county might be interested in. More than capable and competent to be able to support whatever your needs may be. That being said, we're going to go into some of the other programs that GrantWorks helps outside of the American Rescue Plan, and Kelly's going to go ahead and start that off.
I promise I will go through these fast for you and get back to your offices. Again, I'm Kelly. I spent my state career with CDBG program mainly. These are all the federal agencies we work with at GrantWorks, and these are the state agencies that we work with. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the TDA program. With the CDBG funds, these are Community Development Block Grant funds that come from HUD. The regular program comes to Texas, is housed at Texas Department of Agriculture. If it's disaster related, it's over at the General Land Office. So first we're going to talk about the regular program. With CDBG, you have to meet one of the 3 national objectives. So those are listed here. You're going to benefit low to moderate income people. We're going to ask you to prove that by census data or door-to-door surveys. And we are the only firm that I know of that will do those door-to-door surveys for you at no cost to you. Second one is eliminate slum and blight, and the third is the urgent need. So you have to meet one of those 3. Here's a list of the programs, and we're going to go through those individual slides in just a minute. Eligible applicants are non-entitlement cities under 50,000 and non-entitlement counties that have a population under 200,000. So the first one we're going to talk about is the CD fund. That's a Community Development Fund. It is the largest of all of the regular CDBG funds. You're going to meet the national objective of LMI for this fund. You're probably the most familiar with this fund. You can apply every 2 years for this fund. And you're only going to compete within your own COG region. So you're only going to compete with North Central Texas Council of Governments. And the priorities are set at the COG region. So your COG may say water, sewer, streets, drainage, or they may say water, sewer only. So if you apply for anything outside of those priorities, you're going to lose so many points you might as well not apply. You'll have scoring by a unified scoring committee, and this last time all they looked at was were you able to put in a match based on your population, and had you been funded in the last 3 cycles. So that would be 6 years they looked back to see if you were funded, and you lost points if you were funded in one of those 3. Again, every 2 years. The last time it was $350,000 across the state. Before we've seen as low as $250,000 up to $500,000. This time $350,000 across the state. The Downtown Revitalization and Main Street Program is available every year. Meet this national objective here, eliminating slum and blight. You will get extra points if you do like ADA compliance, like at least 50% of, you're going to do maybe sidewalks and lighting and handicap ramps. So you get bonus points for that. This past year was $350,000. Year before that it was up to $500,000. But again, it is available every year. The FAST grant was available 2 years ago. This was a great source of funding because you could get $500,000 with only a $5,000 match. But it wasn't available this year, but hopefully that will come back. You could get fire trucks, ambulance, and other specialized emergency vehicles, emergency rescue equipment. We hope that comes back. Colonial funds are only for localities with 150 miles of the border, so I'll skip through that. We also have a planning and capacity building fund that we work with, and here's what that entails, and other planning services. And these are all in much more detail in your green binder if you want to go to the CDBG tab for there's a lot of information in there. The State Urgent Need Fund, they call the SUN Fund. These are available at times. There's not always funding at TDA for this, and it's if you have an urgent need caused by existing condition that poses serious and immediate threat to the health or welfare of the community. Not for lack of maintenance, but urgent need. So you would call and talk to TDA about that, and they would invite you to apply. And in the past, it's been up to $350,000. The Red Fund, Rural Economic Development, is what used to be the Texas Capital Fund. This is a great program, and they're redeveloping it, so we're excited that that's going to come back. In the past, we've seen cities and counties do an agreement with, they're trying to get business into town to create low to moderate income jobs. So it might be a movie theater, it might be a hotel, it might be a Buc-ee's. I know in the town of Grapeland, 1,400 population, they brought Darling Industries into Grapeland, and it created like 75, well-paying jobs, for these people. And that was, they're taking byproducts off of the chicken farm. So it's a great project. Texas Parks and Wildlife, there wasn't a lot of information here on the slide, but if you open up your green binder and go to Texas Parks and Wildlife, you'll see the 6 program categories that they're talking about here at the bottom. It's usually, these are usually available annually, but there's all kind of things, boat sewage pump outs, community outdoor outreach, there's local parks program, recreational trails, numerous availability there. We also work with the US EDA. The purpose of these funds is to support economic development, foster job creation, and attract private investments in economically distressed areas. So if you're interested in that, there's also more information in your green binder for that. All right, let's come up and talk about TechStop.
All right, we got a couple more slides for y'all. So for the TechStop, you might be familiar with CTIF. It's the County Transportation Infrastructure Fund. So with these funds, it's meant for providing road improvement projects to the eligible areas. So that being said, the allocations are based on a formula, which that's also in the binder. You'll see a square and say 10%, 20%, and so on. Those allocations are a predetermined formula that they designate what the funds available for you would be. There's also the Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program, and that's going to be for bicycle paths and pedestrian infrastructure. So if there's areas that pedestrians are having to walk on the street, it provides them an alternative transportation path for those. And then the county's match is usually 10 or 20% for that as well. And then for the home program, do you want to go over this one, Shirley?
Do this real quick, you can stand here with me.
Of course.
So, the home program is one of my favorites. If you are a city under 3,000 population, are you under 3,000? This is a program with no match. And the county, if you subtract the population of all the incorporated cities and you are under 20,000 population, you have no match. What this allows you to do is to take those low to moderate income people within your community who are living in substandard conditions, and they don't have the funds to be able to fix up their homes. The house is torn down, and a brand new home is built for them, 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. It costs the county or the city nothing, and it does not cost the homeowner anything. So there's a brand new home, and it's up to all International Building Code standards of today. So this is a great way to take a blighted area in your community and start fixing it up and help the citizens who are low to moderate income and they just don't have the wherewithal. They do have to own the property. They cannot be renting or leasing. They have to own the property. So, but it's a great program. It is a win-win for everybody.
What's the funding on this program?
Funding comes from the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, TDHCA, acronyms again, starts at HUD, comes to the state, and then your applications go to the state to TDHCA.
So we don't, how much should they how much does HUD set aside for this?
That changes. Right now, there's several $1 million that goes into a pot, and then all the money goes away, and then you wait for another round of money to go in, and then that goes away. We went for 2 years with virtually no money in that pot at all. So, but there is money now, and it is a great opportunity for you all to look into this and move forward with it. The homes, I think that they're about 120 to 130,000. When I first started with GrantWorks, they were $55,000, and so it's increased each cycle. There's been an increase, and since Harvey, they've raised it significantly because no builder wants to come and build a house when they're doing all the others and they're making a lot more money. So now they've increased it. I think it's about $120,000. And the house that GrantWorks builds is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. It's about just slightly over 1,100 square feet. So,
Where do we get the data to get us to qualify for this 20,000, under 20,000 for the county? Where do you get the data?
Yeah.
Last year's census or
Yes.
the cities?
Yeah, we can just subtract it. We'll take whatever the city census is, delete it, and then figure out what your
See if you qualify.
Yeah, if you qualify. Now, I don't want to just tell you that if you're over that 20,000, for every 1,000 you're over, you start with 3% match, then another 1,000 would be 4%. It goes up to 15%. But if you're under that 20,000, there is no match. Same thing with the cities. If you're under 3,000, there's no match. 3,000 to 4,000 is 3%. 4,000 to 5,000 is 4%, and so on, up to 15%. So, but it is a great program, and it's very helpful for the citizens.
Okay, the disaster recovery funds, these are the side of CDBG funds that are disaster related. So instead of going over to TDA, they're gonna come down in Texas at the general land office. Okay, the application cycle, and you see bullet 2, these DR funds may be provided through a competitive process or through a COG developed method of distribution, depending on the process established in their recovery action plan. We also work with buyouts and acquisitions, and I always get this confused. And so inside your green binder under the Texas General Land Office, there's a box at the top. And the difference in a buyout allows for the pre-storm fair market value to be used for the property valuation, but also requires that the property is maintained as open space in perpetuity. The acquisition only allows the current fair market value to be used for the valuation, but the property can be redeveloped in a resilient manner to provide affordable housing opportunities in a community. These coastal problems don't apply to y'all, they're just for the coastal areas. And that brings us to the end for all your questions. I know we've overwhelmed you.
Okay, so I'm assuming that what GrantWorks does with regards to the hazard mitigation and the state grants is somewhat different than what y'all do with the American Rescue Funds. I'm trying to understand, so what
GrantWorks does, we're an administrative firm. So you might want to do an RFP for just the American Rescue, or you might want to do request for proposals for the home program, or we work with all of these programs that we've talked about today. And that 2 CFR 200 makes you go out for procurement every single time. You can't just say, I want to use GrantWorks for everything. We don't work with all the programs we're interested in.
every single one?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's 2 CFR 200. GrantWorks, if it's not an allocation and it's a grant, then you're going to go out for request for proposals. You have to do that for either allocation or grant. That has to happen. The difference is that once you hire your administrator, if it is a grant, they're going to write an application for you. That application is going to be sent into the appropriate government agency. Then hopefully you get funded, and then GrantWorks would manage the program. They have project managers, and they're going to manage it for you from the beginning to the end. They're going to do all the environmental, they're going to do the employee interviews, they're going to do every requirement, because their job is to keep you in compliance throughout the whole program.
Because we want you to be able to apply over and over again.
So in advance, we have to know what we want to do.
Well, that's something
In
after
advance.
you go out for procurement, and that's something we can kind of talk with you with as well. The main difference is with the American Rescue Plan, it's not a competitive fund. It's an allocation that assuming you do the pre-funding steps, that money is yours already. With pre-qualifying, with the budget and everything, if you're not in time for the county, you're good.
But there's still project management. With the American Rescue Plan, GrantWorks will still have project managers who will keep you in compliance and help manage the program from the beginning through the end.
What's good about GrantWorks is Ken's team, they're gonna do nothing but American Rescue. They're not involved over here in the home program and the CDBG program. They're a dedicated department to just American Rescue.
So that's one RFP for the American Rescue Plan?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, every program that you might want to do requires an RFP. That's just the way you have to go and be in compliance. You have to go out for proposals for engineers and for administrators for every program you're interested in.
Cost?
The cost?
Cost?
All the management fees will be able to come out of, for the American Rescue Plan is what you're talking about, I'm assuming, or?
Yes.
Yeah, so they will be able, as an eligible expense, to come out of the allocation funds.
Okay, but what does that cost?
It's usually a percentage.
Yeah, it's a percentage, and it's based off your allocation, if you wanna.
Yeah, it's based on the allocation, and it also depends on, we do a somewhat of an evaluation on the most likely program path you're gonna take. We price different activities a little bit differently. I'll give you an example. If you were gonna do what I would call public service type initiatives, where you're gonna do projects that are gonna include an application cycle, eligibility process, where now that takes dedicated staff to run that. There'd probably be an appeals process we would have to invent. And then you have the process of handing out all the money. That's labor intensive, and we have higher fees. If you're doing things like premium pay, government services, they're more accounting based. They're not labor intensive. And then the happy medium is infrastructure. Infrastructure has a bunch of labor in the beginning, but then it kind of tapers off as all you're really doing is the monitoring and progress reporting for the Treasury. So to give it, this is the percent, wouldn't work. I would say that the percents go down rapidly as their allocation goes up, because obviously, managing a $2 million grant doesn't cost twice as much as managing a $1 million grant. Because a lot of the stuff you're gonna do regardless of the size of the grant. Our fees run anywhere from 4.5% to maybe 6.5%, 7% typically. Depending on what the most likely outcome is, what the most likely programs that locality wants to manage.
Thank you.
And all these other programs that we handle, from GrantWorks standpoint, most of the programs, we don't charge to write applications. There are some hazard mitigation that we do charge for, but CDBG grants, we do not charge to write the applications. If you don't get funded, we don't get paid. So making sure that we turn in good quality applications for you is to our benefit as well as yours. So, and our fees are also paid for out of the grant money that you receive for CD grants.
So if you don't recover any grant money, you don't get paid anything?
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to point out to you, it's in your third tab, in your green binder, funding history. We've managed more than $6 billion in projects, and we're #1 in every one of these categories, whether that's CDBG, regular program, disaster program, all these hazard mitigation, the home program, TxDOT, Texas Parks and Wildlife. GrantWorks is #1 for a reason. We've done this, like Brett said, for 42 years. Our president's still very involved with the company, and what Bruce has done over the years is he hires people from TDM, like Wendy Kirby, who's on vacation, couldn't be here today with us. She used to work over there in the hazard mitigation at the state agency, and now she runs our department at GrantWorks. And it's the same way with the home program or the CDBG programs. We have people with experience from the state agency. We know what those applications are supposed to look like because we used to work there and we scored those applications. So we're just now retired and on the other side of the table. So it's a very well-run company. I knew I wanted to come to work for this company when I left the state, and
Now, I just want to reiterate again that not all of the grants that we write, the applications that we write, there are some of them that we charge a fee for, but it's non-refundable. But normally, if you don't get funded in that cycle, they'll just try and do it again and do it again until you do get funded.
So what counties in this general vicinity are y'all doing ARPA grant
Oh, Lord.
management for?
Where do you say, what geography? Is that?
What counties in North Texas, central North Texas, are you doing ARPA grant management
A
for?
lot of the counties are in a similar situation where they're just trying to figure out what they want to use the funds on right now. No one, especially with this first reporting of August 31st, no one really wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. They're still waiting on some more guidance. If any of y'all have been to either the conferences in Waco or in Austin TAC, they're continually giving more guidance at those conferences. And so counties are still kind of waiting for information. We have, and as we said, you have to go through a procurement process to get grant management done. So, or to go out for a solicitation, send out RFPs. We're just now starting to see those from the counties. They're just now starting to move. So I've been knocking on every county in North Central Texas' door. So the potential is there. We're just getting everybody warm and fuzzy and comfortable with wanting to pursue the use of these funds now that we have eligible activities and guidance that's been further passed on that, and a little bit further guidance with the reporting and stuff like that. So,
I know is it 85%, Ken?
What's that?
The RFPs we have put in for, we've been awarded 85% of
About
those.
83, yeah.
83%.
We have currently, I believe, over 80.
Yeah, I'm pulling the spreadsheet
We've been
up
hired
right now.
in over 80 cities and counties in the state of Texas. And
Do you have the staff available to manage additional
Absolutely.
grants?
we've developed a whole department that does nothing but art.
Yeah, that's why we keep them dedicated. They're not sharing responsibility. We actually had to increase the size because we were winning more than we expected to win. So we did our initial hiring, and then we did a bunch of training, and really brought in our first group of project managers that kind of learned with us before the bill was even published. And when we started responding to RFPs, we were winning at a high rate and had to hire more of a team. Right now we're at 84 clients right now.
And do you have sample RFPs in case
Yes.
anyone would like to see a sample to?
And aren't those available on the ARCIT website as well?
And if you would like to get the wording that's approved, we can send you over the wording for a request for proposals that goes on your agendas.
We can guide you through procurement, answer general questions. We just can't talk specifics of projects until we might be hired.
Yeah, legally.
But usually on that American, ARCIT stands for
American, excuse me.
Association of Rural Communities in Texas. These acronyms, ARCIT. But on there, you can go and it says, whether you procurement for American Rescue, procurement for CDBG.
But you do need to be a member of ARCIT in
Pull
order to
that
get
down.
into that, to find that. And we can find out if you are a member or not. Does anybody know? We can look it up for you. But all of the necessary documents to go out for procurement for both administrators and engineers are on that website. And all of those documents have been thoroughly reviewed legally to make sure that everybody, that you would be in compliance.
So thank y'all for coming out, and taking your time away from your busy offices and have lunch with us. And if you want to take a plate to go back to your coworkers, feel free.
If y'all have any other questions, like I said, all of our contact information should be there at the business card at the front of these green binders. Please don't hesitate to shoot me an email, give me a phone call, and if we can do anything else for you, have any questions or anything else you need further guidance, I would be more than happy to help. Thank y'all.
We have worked with the county before, so we are familiar with it. Thank you all very much.
Good job. Okay, the next item on the agenda for the special meeting is the salary discussion and maybe go into executive session. Do I hear a motion regarding that?
I'll make a motion to table that executive session.
Second.
Yeah, motion been made and second. We go to table the going into executive session regarding salary. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Thank you. Adjourned. This meeting is adjourned.